Coming up on Network Africa, the United Nations says millions of people in Zimbabwe are on the verge of starvation. Tunisia's largest party, the Ennahda Islamist movement, announced his co-founder, Abdel Fattah Abu, is its candidate in September's presidential election. Hundreds of protesters in Malawi demand the resignation of the country's electoral commission. Network Africa begins now. I am Amarachi Ubani. The United Nations has warned that over 5 million people in Zimbabwe, that's about a third of the population, need food aid, with many on the verge of starvation. The World Food Programme has launched a $331 million appeal as the country battles the effects of drought, a cyclone and an economic crisis. Once a regional breadbasket, Zimbabwe has suffered years of turmoil. Recent harvests have been badly affected by drought, and the price of food has risen sharply. Low water levels have also hit the main hydroelectric plants in Kariba, triggering rolling power cuts across the country. The country is also facing a financial crisis and has reintroduced the Zimbabwe dollar a decade after it was abandoned amidst rampant inflation. Let's get more on the story now from Zimbabwean journalist Nigel Nyamutumbu. He is in Harare. Nigel, thank you for joining us on the program. How is the government reacting to the warning from the United Nations that millions of people in the country are facing starvation?
The government of Zimbabwe has declared state of national emergency, or what would ordinarily be termed a national disaster in the wake of the El Nino-induced drought, which the United Nations report that it will result in millions of people facing starvation, facing hunger. And what the government has also done, in addition to declaring it a state of a national emergency, is to launch a humanitarian support fund, which they had launched in the wake of the cyclone eastern parts of the country earlier this year. So that is so far how government has responded to this disaster. The international agencies and then the Western world in general, led by the EU and the United States, have already pledged their support to try and avert this crisis, the massive hunger.
And it does appear Zimbabwe has a long road ahead of it. It is dealing with a food crisis now, also an electricity crisis, financial crisis. It's facing quite a number of challenges 3 years after former President Robert Mugabe was ousted as president. Do you think Zimbabweans are witnessing the change they hoped for when Mugabe was removed?
Change that Zimbabweans are witnessing in the country is since the time Robert Mugabe was deposed from office in November 2017 is change for the worse. There is no real light at the end of the tunnel insofar as the people's livelihoods are concerned. With one crisis after the other, and the country's economy, worsening to the scale of pre-2008 era, at which hyperinflation was at its peak, breaking world records. And certainly that era, there are some striking similarities between what happened then and what is happening now. You look at the economy, you look at the livelihoods of people, you look at the human rights situation, you look at the civic space. You look at sincerity of government, you look at policy clarity, everything points to a country that is in dire need for revival, a country which is ground literally to its heart, and a country which is in serious crisis.
Yeah, understandably so. But we do understand emotions are high all across the country. The main opposition party, the NDCs, are planning street protests next week against the government's handling of the economy. How is the government, Nigel, reacting to the planned protests and the possibility of it holding next week?
Yes, the opposition has uh, announced that on next week, Friday, on the 16th of August, they will be taken to the streets to pile pressure on President Mnangagwa's government, and have since been cleared by the police to do so. What government has done is to remind the opposition that any form of action that they would take if such protests turn violent, or if there's going to be any form of looting, or if there's going to be any form of disturbance, the government has already declared that it is ready to step in, and they've even made stern warnings that they can even deploy the military. There be disturbances. Government is definitely paranoid at the prospects of people who are angry, people that are starving, people that have really lost hope, and is definitely afraid of its own people, judging by the reaction to the calls to demonstrate by the opposition. Whether that will yield anything, or whether that would bring the warring political parties to the table to dialogue and for a sustainable developmental future for the country, is yet to be seen. Also, it will be yet to be seen whether there will be any form of violence within the protest, or whether there will be any trigger, happy or heavy-handedness, a response by the country securocrats, as the case in the past. We'll wait to see what will obtain next week Friday. But as of now, what we have is just assurance that there is a mass protest led by the opposition, and that government is ready to respond to any violent disturbance.
Well, the Zimbabwean government does have a lot on its hands, doesn't it, Nigel? Thanks again for speaking with us. Nigel Nyamatumbo, our eyes and ears on the ground in Harare. We're in North Africa now, where Tunisia's largest party, the Ennahda Islamist movement, has announced its co-founder, Abdel Fattah Mourou, will be its candidate in September's presidential election. It's the first time the party has put someone forward for the role since Tunisia's transition to democracy following the revolution of 2011. The election was brought forward after the death of President Beji Caid Essebsi last month. He was the country's first democratically elected head of state. Former interim President Monsef Marzouki, who lost to Mr. Essebsi in 2014, is also bidding for the job. Hundreds of people in Malawi have taken to the streets of the main cities to demand the resignation of the head of the electoral agency, Jane Ansah. The Human Rights Defenders Coalition, which organized the protest, accused her of helping to rig the May election to keep Peter Mutharika as president. But the Electoral Commission insists the elections were free and fair and have denied any allegations of vote rigging. These are the fourth wide-scale demonstrations since the May elections, where President Mutharika was re-elected a second time.
Our message is the same, that Jane Ansah must resign. She messed up an election, and will continue to do demonstrations for as long as she doesn't step down. And any efforts to stop people from demonstrating are really against the constitutional rights of the people. The courts have said nobody can stop demonstrations. We are supposed to hold them in a peaceful manner and unarmed, which is what we are. We don't have any arms here, and we are working very peacefully. I don't see why anybody should attempt to stop.
Mozambique's government and the former rebel group Renamo have signed a peace deal, a final one at that, at a ceremony attended by regional heads of state. The agreement, which follows months of negotiations, comes 27 years after the civil war ended. The agreement, announced last week, allows former rebel fighters to be integrated into military or onto civilian life. However, some Renamo members who were close to the group's former leader, the late Afonso Dhlakama, say they will not disarm as long as Osufo Momade is president of the party. Our group of Nigerians under the umbrella #TakeItBack have protested outside the nation's High Commission in Pretoria, South Africa. They're demanding, among other things, a better governed Nigeria, better security, safety for Nigerians living in South Africa, and the release of those being detained in Nigeria for protesting against government policies. The protesters were received by the High Commissioner, Ambassador Kabir Bala, who encouraged them to be law-abiding at all times. Our South Africa Bureau Chief, Betty Dibia, has the story.
The protesters had just enough numbers for a picket. Their placards and war songs showed what they were there for.
Solidarity forever, only solidarity forever. We shall always fight for our rights.
And that war song soon attracted the police, and even more police. The space sometimes got agitated. Even a senior embassy official sent to address the protesters was rejected. They wanted the ambassador himself to receive the memorandum of demands and to address them. He eventually did.
As Nigerians resident in South Africa, we are moved to come to you as our father and representative here to pass our message across back home that we are bitter and we are not happy with the situation that is going on in Nigeria.
There is no way government will achieve its own objectives of making your life better, making my life better, making the lives of our future generations better if we don't cooperate, and also to do it peacefully, cogently, and to put forward what it is that is our vision for that.
Crime does not know nationality, it is only personality. So any individual who is found wanting must face the law. Yes. We are standing in support of the South African government that they must investigate every crime that is committed on this land, and we will be willing to support every judgment passed, whoever is at fault. So on a final note, sir, we demand that the federal government release Omoyele Sowore and our comrades.
Well, what you have given me, I have taken, and I will also pass it on to them. Yes, we would not want a South African to go to Nigeria and violate our laws. We will not accept that. And as much as reciprocity is the foundation of diplomacy, we will also not accept a situation where a Nigerian will also violate the laws of South Africa. If you Nigerians that are living here, you don't support me, or you don't respect yourselves by doing only things that are legitimate, only things that are legitimate in this country, then you are not supporting me. You are in fact undermining me, and you are in fact undermining Nigeria.
The crowd soon dispersed. They hope that their pleas will be heard and granted. From Pretoria, South Africa, Betty Dibia, Channels Television News.
Still ahead on Network Africa. A female lawmaker in Kenya is sent out of parliament for taking her baby into the chamber. Stay with us.